Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. We will be getting started in just a couple of moments, so hang with us as a few more people trickle into the room. Good to see you all here. And just before we get started, a couple pieces of housekeeping. I just dropped a chat in to the chat feature. So if you look at your lower right-hand corner, you'll see polls, questions, and chat, and that's where we will be interacting with you all throughout our office hours. So feel free, if you see a little red dot, to click on that, and we've got a couple polls planned. And please feel free to use the questions tab throughout, so that we can answer any questions that you have. Jonathan and Mark have a ton of knowledge that they are excited to share with you. So feel free, challenge them, ask them the hard questions. And we will go ahead and jump in and get started. So again, welcome. My name is Amanda. I am on the marketing team here at JM&A Group. I've been on the team for about 3 years, and I support our content strategy and digital engagement. So basically what that means is my job here is to help just build our community of dealers and automotive family, and to just deliver meaningful resources to you, office hours being just one of those. So I will go ahead and kick it off to my excellent panelists, Jonathan Jordan and Mark McGoldrick. Guys, would you introduce yourselves, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Jordan. I oversee the sales strategy team at JM&A. I've been with JM&A for about 8 years. Prior to this role, I was part of our field sales team in the Northeast. The sales strategy team is responsible for several different corporate sales initiatives with JM&A, such as modern retail and virtual F&I. And we're responsible for making sure that our field team and ultimately all our dealer partners are prepared for the future as our industry continues to evolve.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark McGoldrick. I'm our Northeast Area Sales Director. I've been with JM&A Group for 19 years, and my main responsibility is really acquisition and growing and our dealer partners in the Northeast part of the United States. I'm excited to join Amanda as well as Jonathan today to kind of dive into some performance trends. And some of those hard trends that we'll go through is F&I PVR, products per delivery, finance reserve, product income, and front PVR. And this information and the data was gathered by surveying about 1,800 dealers nationwide. So you'll see that kind of performance is kind of split geographically based on where that information came in, what part of the country. But before we dive into those trends, I'd like to get some really participation, some interaction, and really try to identify our first poll today, which you'll see on the bottom right, is what do you see as your biggest revenue growth opportunity for 2022? It'd be interesting to get everybody's insight.
And you should have just seen that pop up on your bottom right under polls. So go ahead and fill in whether that's your goal, your personal goals, your dealership goals. We have new car gross, used car gross, finance reserve, and product income as those selections. And you can go ahead and select more than one. And we'll leave that open for just a few more moments. So if you can go ahead and make your selection on biggest opportunities for revenue growth this year. And then we can kind of talk through each of those things as we go down the trends and the data that Mark and Jonathan have to share for you. All right, it looks like things have leveled out for the most part. So Mark and Jonathan, it looks like in a big lead, F&I product income is that biggest opportunity for revenue growth, followed by used car gross. And then new and finance are tied for third, bringing up the rear. But thank you, everyone, for your participation. We will have some more polls and opportunities for engagement throughout, so keep paying attention to that area. But other than that, you guys go ahead and dive in if you can speak to those opportunities for growth.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda, and thanks, everyone, for your participation in the poll. And please feel free, as we go through this, jump in. Ask questions, share some insights that you have from your dealership. But let's jump into the numbers here, and we'll certainly hit on all of those things that you guys mentioned in the poll. But to start with F&I PVR, and to just level set and make sure we're on the same page, the way we define F&I PVR is income produced in the F&I department of the dealership, and that's really comprised of two things: income from selling F&I products such as service contracts, gap protection, etc., as well as reserve paid to the dealership from the finance company. And those two numbers are added together to get this PVR, per vehicle retail average, for F&I for all the transactions that happen in a dealership. When we look at the several different charts and graphs we're going to look at today, we're going to look at a 3-year trend, actually a little bit more than a 3-year trend. All these numbers start in January of 2019 and then all the way through Q1 of 2022. So wrapping up in March of 2022. So we've got some relatively recent data. And I think it's really important to look at this amount of time when we look at any trends right now. Because as we all know, the last few years have been a little bit different than the several before, with everything going on in the world. And we really need to kind of go back to 2019 to level set before some of those major changes started happening. Mark mentioned before, we've got all this data separated into 4 different regions: the central, northeast, southeast, and west. And you'll see some clear differences between those part of the country when we look at dealership performance. I think there's also a few other things just to keep in mind. One of those is we see big differences in performance between different OEMs, between different parts of the country, as is called out here, but also between different markets within those different regions as well. So this data is really just directional to kind of give you a good idea of what's going on in the marketplace, but more importantly, to really understand the trends that are happening overall. So not necessarily the dollar amounts, but the overall trends. And with that said, we can clearly see a consistent trend across the country when we look at PVR. And if you look at 2019, we had some steady, very modest increases throughout the year in PVR. We jumped up with a nice little jump at the beginning of 2020, and then everywhere in the country fell off in PVR. And we all know what happened in March of 2020 with really the start of the pandemic. Those numbers started to climb a little bit after that, fell off towards the end of 2020. And then we really just saw exponential growth throughout 2021, upwards of, depending on what part of the country, 35 to 40% growth in PVR. You look at parts, like the West Coast going from around 1,600 to all the way to 2,200 PVR, and then you see similar trends throughout.
Yeah, a couple of those drivers too, just speaking to local dealers on my side, Jonathan, in the Northeast, is really dealers focused on 2 segments that are probably driving a lot of this trend in the last, let's call it 12 to 18 months. One is really focused around vehicle service contract and driving that penetration up and building value with their customers, as well as the average ticket price for vehicles these days are more financed than ever. So reserve is another big driver. Those 2 big drivers really kind of set that trend. And back to your point, it didn't matter if it was the Northeast or the West, that trend's pretty consistent throughout the country.
Yeah, for sure. Oh. Go ahead, Amanda. I'm sorry.
Okay. I was going to say a bit of a 2-part question for you guys. So as we go through this data, and we know that there's a lot more that we have to share, what would you say, or maybe just level set some perspective for dealers who are looking at this and they're way above, way below, or maybe their trend line looks nothing like this? Like, how can we help put that in perspective as we start to share more?
Yeah, for sure. It's natural, especially for those of us with a sales background. We're oftentimes competitive. You probably look at this chart and you're plotting exactly where your dealership is, and you may be above, you may be below, you may be somewhere in between. And again, there's several different factors that could play into, just because you're below these numbers does not necessarily mean you're performing poorly. Just because you're above doesn't necessarily mean you're, the best F&I guy on the planet. But what I will say is the trend is important. If you haven't over the past 18 to 24 months seen similar trends, seen similar increases with F&I PVR, I think that's something that you should really look at, and really look at the processes that you're using in the store, the accountability in the store, to really try to identify why you haven't seen the same trends as other parts or other dealers out there.
Yeah, Jonathan, I think that's the important part, right? I think we're always going to have dealers that are performing at a good. They may be below these lines, but I think it's going back to that trend line just to make sure that's an upward trend over the last 18 months. I think that's probably the biggest picture. And if that trend line is not that consistent upward trend and it's somewhat flatlined or going downward, then I think we're going to get into some other data here, which may be able to identify some opportunities on how to get it corrected.
Right. And we did have a question come in from the audience wondering if this is this trend specific to new or used?
So this trend is, this data that you're looking at is new and used data combined. But we don't have it isolated in this presentation. But when we look at new and we look at used, we see very similar trends. Sometimes you see the used lagging a little bit behind the new, which kind of makes sense because a lot of the increases that we've seen in used car performance are because of new car inventory, falling behind a little bit. But we do see similar increases in new and used.
Okay, thank you.
So products per deal, simple to explain how many F&I products on average per deal is a dealership selling. A little bit different trend here. And if you think about what we just looked at with PVR, we saw kind of steady, modest increases through 2019, a little bit of a flat line through 2020, and then kind of that exponential growth through 2021 and into 2022. And I think with PPD, what we've seen is just steady growth. There have been a few little valleys throughout, but across the country, when we look at this data, we've seen steady growth in products per deal all the way through everything that's happened in the past 3 years. And I think that's a big testament to F&I managers and to dealerships for really staying committed to refining processes and to getting a little bit better, regardless of kind of what's going on in the marketplace, because this is something that we can control, that dealers can control outside of some of the other kind of external factors that are happening.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I think consumer confidence is higher than ever when it comes to F&I products, really protecting their investment. So back to your point, I think it really is kudos to the business managers and dealers in general, just to keep really steady on their process and continue to drive value and build kind of value and need awareness around these F&I products for their customers.
So finance reserve. This came up a little bit earlier as one of the options, and finance reserve income paid by a lender, by a leasing company, as a commission to a dealership with a contract. If you look at this, a little bit interesting with the regions. If you look at kind of the previous PBR, we look at PPD. There's some gaps, pretty significant gaps between the parts of the country. We see these lines grouped a lot tighter together and a lot more consistent. But again, same trends throughout the country, pretty flat throughout kind of 2019 into the middle of 2020. And then we started to see these numbers go up steeply. And saw big gains here, which obviously helped contribute to PVR, which Mark talked about earlier. One thing I will call your attention to here is when we look at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, we've started to see these numbers flatten out and even decline in some instances a little bit. And I think it's something to be aware of, something to focus on. Obviously, interest rates have been creeping up, which has made that side of the business a little bit more competitive, a little bit tougher to generate that income. And we have seen that across the country.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those trends that somewhat uncontrollable, right? There's other factors that kind of drive what finance reserve is. Jonathan, to your point, as rates kind of increase, you can kind of see where that's starting to flatline here the first quarter of 2022. But one watch out that I think dealers will continue to look at is as leasing penetration kind of increases, as inventory would come back in the next 18 months. I think staying focused, where right now we're capitalizing a lot of that reserve on lease deals, even if it's a lease versus a retail. But I think that's going to be a watch out to ensure that we don't go back to, cutting that process and staying true to the process, especially with lease customers, continue to drive that finance reserve trend line. Even if it's a flat line, I think that's a good thing, just so it doesn't go backwards trend.
That's great insight. So I'm curious to know, with finance reserve, as you guys mentioned, right, there's only so much that a dealer has control over, this being, maybe not, they don't have so much control. So what are some other things that maybe are more within their control that they could be doing to help find opportunities elsewhere?
Yeah, well, I think I want to stay on finance reserve for just a minute on that. And you're right, Amanda. There's a lot that's kind of out of our control. Mark brought up lease programs. Obviously, as the market changes, there's the potential to have a lot of subvented rates again on the retail side of things as well. And sometimes when you go from being able to mark up a deal 2 points to a flat from a lender on a subvented deal, obviously that affects us overall. And so the thing I'll say on finance reserve is you want to maximize it the best you can and work your deal the best way possible to maximize that, whether it be on a retail or a lease. But there's going to be some instances where it's really tough to average $800 a deal on finance reserve. And so really what we've got to focus on when you have those deals where it's completely out of your control is products and the product income that you can generate on those deals. And if we can move to the next slide, that will show, I think, really a silver lining to what we just looked at with reserve. And so if we look at product income, very similar and not surprising to the PPD trend that we saw. So we look at products per deal, steadily increasing. Same thing with product income. So we've seen these steady increases. 2021, they got a little bit steeper, a little bit better. And we have not seen the product income fall off towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year like we saw the finance reserve. And, I think that's a really good indicator that dealerships are doing a good job. They have good processes. They're continuing to follow those. So that even when that finance reserve dips a little bit, we're solid on products. We're continuing to sell more products and generate a solid, good profit on the products that we're selling.
Yeah, and this is this was the number one poll where everybody's biggest area of opportunity for revenue growth was product income. And I think it comes back to two things. One, pricing strategy, making sure your pricing strategy is consistent, but also product mix. You have the right products on the right menus, and you offer it based on what the customer's ownership may look like, depending on how many years, how many miles. I think those two factors, if you stay back to the process piece, if you stay consistent with those two things, I think you'll continue to kind of build value and, more importantly, maximize that revenue here in 2022 and in the future as well.
All right. So you might have not expected this with a call with the JM&A Group. Obviously, we're very focused on F&I, but I don't think you can look at dealership performance data nowadays and miss what's been going on the front of the deal. And this is a huge part of the story when we look at front end PVR. And obviously that's the income that's generated on the front from the sale of the vehicle. If you look at 2019, which is kind of to go back and level set, everywhere in the country, average, I think at the high was like $600-700 of the dealers that we surveyed And we had entire regions of the country that had negative front PVR, which is crazy to think about. But I know for those of us that have been in the business for a while, doesn't surprise me necessarily to see that was going on. But if you look at the numbers, we saw everybody consistent with back PVR trail off around March of 2020. Then those numbers started to creep up, dipped a little bit towards the end of 2021. And then we saw just crazy growth, even crazier than what we saw on the F&I PVR on the front. And if you look, we had entire regions running a negative number, now $25, $26, $3,000 a copy on there. So just crazy percentage increases on the front end of those deals.
It's crazy where that trend line, first to second quarter of 2021, how it just kind of shot up. I think it comes back to we were challenged with new car inventory. So dealers were savvy. They capitalized on pre-owned, and that's where that front PVR kind of just skyrocketed. I think there was a big opportunity, and more importantly, I think dealers capitalized that in 2021. And I think that's where you see that trend line just jump up straight up, is based on that the new to used mix.
Yeah, and I think what a great kind of thing to look at to remind us all of kind of what opportunity is out there. I think in the industry, especially on new cars, there was a lot of talk several years ago around, there was a lot of margin compression. It was very tough to generate income, especially on new cars with some OEMs on the front end. And I think this experience over the past few years has really shown what the opportunity can be, on these cars. And obviously we've been going through really unique times with a pandemic and with inventory shortages and everything else. But I think this is going to be important to remember as we go into the future. And so looking at this chart that we just pulled up, what we did here, and Mark and I just alluded to inventory, is we took this orange line, and the orange line is average new car inventory on the ground in America. So if we look back beginning of 2019, we're around 4 million cars on the ground. I'm sure no one's surprised, we've seen that number go down pretty consistently over the past 3 years. There was one little jump or a couple little jumps throughout 2020, but it goes down and continues to go down. And I think we can all agree that hopefully it's kind of gotten to the bottom at this point, and hopefully it'll creep back up. But as that number was going down, if you look at the light blue line in the middle, that's F&I PVR, which we just looked at kind of isolated with just PVR. But we saw pretty significant increases over the past 3 years. And then the dark blue line is front PVR. So this really shows as inventory went down, profitability on the front and the back went up significantly. The other thing I want to call out here is for a long, long time prior to this, F&I PVR was significantly more than front-end PVR when we looked at dealers as a whole. And F&I was that thing where, hey, you're not going to make much on the front, but we can make it up in F&I. And the really cool thing that's happened here is we're making even more in F&I, but that front-end number has surpassed F&I. So dealers are doing a great job on the front, and they're continuing to really maximize the back end of those deals as well.
This chart's pretty interesting because we always look at either front PVR separately or inventory or front end like we did in previous slides. This kind of tells a great picture on exactly where that axle is. And back to your point, how front end gross kind of just jumped up on that second quarter of last year. F&I continues to stay steady, and I think that trend will continue. But this slide pretty much tells you a great picture here in the last 36 months, kind of how that inventory is impacted and the shift from new to used and where that profitability is going to.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to really look at this, all of us who are in the industry. And, I think the industry, dealers, F&I managers, salespeople have done a fantastic job maximizing performance when we look at the front, when we look at the back. But we also have to realize that one of the really the big factors that has helped us has been inventory. When we look at these low levels of inventory, crazy high demand from consumers. So we've kind of had the wind at our backs in a lot of ways to help us. And that's not to say we haven't done a great job, because we have. But I think we all have to know that orange line is going to come back up. And we don't think we all know exactly when or exactly how. And we're going to dive into that in just a little bit. But something to be thinking about as we go through this is, as that orange line gets back to normal, how do we keep those two blue lines where they're at? How do we get them a little bit higher, or how do we just maintain them?
Yeah, I think that's the big question, Jonathan. It's so clear by the data that we've just shown already that, the industry isn't what it was 2 or 3 years ago, and there's no expectation that it will go back to that. And the consumers of 2 and 3 years ago are not the consumers of today. Expectations have shifted. So to your point, the big question is, what can we be doing now to prepare for what's to come?
Yeah, I think that's so important to think about, because like I said earlier, we've got the wind at our back a little bit when we think about the individual transaction. I think we've definitely got some headwind when we think about volume. And, because inventory's been very low, we haven't been able to sell as many cars. So we've had to make it up on every single car, that we can. But what got us here is not necessarily going to get us to the next level. And as inventory comes back, as it changes, and as consumers continue to evolve, we're going to have to evolve with them.
Yeah, and I think inventory will continue to be a concern. And this is pretty a good graph here on the left-hand side. This kind of gives you a 6-year picture of the global light vehicle production summary, vehicles that are going to be produced in the United States or in North America. You'll see in 2021, we just was about 13 million. We expect it to be just shy of 15 million here in 2022. But in the short term, it's going to be a concern. But you'll see as production kind of increases in 2023 and 2024, and it starts hitting that 17 million, it'll give us the ability to, back to your point, Jonathan, what got us here won't get us there. And just on the right-hand side, a little bit about new days supply for the last 3 years. And you can kind of see where that trend line, once again, the inventory first quarter of last year kind of flatlined a little bit in that yellow there. You see the graph really throughout 2021, the second and third and fourth quarter kind of stayed flat just because the inventory was down. You can see that trend really out of the gate here, the first quarter of 2022, kind of mirroring that same kind of effect right now as we kind of continue to kind of be challenged with inventory as a whole.
Yeah, it's when we look at these numbers, it really, again, when we look at the previous graph and then we look at this, it really highlights, how big of a change inventory has been when we look at kind of average days supply from 100 days to 30. And I know some of you on the call are probably at numbers much lower than that. Even and what you're dealing with. And unfortunately, we're going to be dealing with that for a while, but we're not going to be dealing with it forever. And, as you look at kind of some of these projections, there's a lot of smart organizations that are saying, by 2023, 2024, things are kind of back to normal. And so I think that's something that we've all got to focus on, which is a really good thing, by the way. If we can sell that many cars, that's awesome. How do we make sure that we just maximize every deal?
Yeah, great point. As we get to the next slide, you'll see the consumer demand and personal car ownership will remain strong, right? If you remember pre-pandemic, there was a lot of buzz around ride sharing. And the transportation methods, 49% of them preferred ride sharing. But you can kind of see where that trend line kind of came down coming out of 2021, where only 38%. And it kind of shifts back to that personal car ownership, where it was really challenged at 45% in 2018. We can see that's going to continue to grow. Consumers want to have their personal ownership experience. And I think it's going to see a shift from that post-pandemic, from the ride sharing really to the personal ownership.
Yeah, I think we can all remember, Mark, several years ago, there was a lot of buzz, a lot of talk around, are consumers really going to want to even have their own cars anymore?
Yeah.
I can hop in an Uber, I can rent a car for a short period of time. There was a lot of talk around, autonomous kind of cars that you can borrow. And, going through the pandemic, people are clearly trending back the other way into, hey, I like having my own car. I like having that safe space. And, that's one thing that's really going to continue to prop up demand for the foreseeable future, really.
Yeah. And as personal car ownership kind of continue to stay strong, the consumer demand around omni-channel options will continue as well, where the customer kind of wants to be met. And you can kind of see here on the left-hand side, in 2021, customers who bought a vehicle, you could see just under 12% bought the vehicle online. They wanted to do everything from A to Z online, but there was still a strong demand of being in store at 88%. Now, consumers, if it's available to them, you'll see that there's going to be more customers that want to be kind of controlling that sales process online. And you see that jump to about 35%, but there's still going to be a lot of demand for in-store purchase. So it's going to shift a little bit, but I think from an omni-channel options, where the consumer wants to be met is going to be important, especially as inventory comes back, and us engaging with the consumer where they want to be met is going to be important to continue to drive that car sales.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting stat, Mark, because we asked the same, or this survey asked the same group of customers, did you purchase your vehicle online? 11% said yes, and then if it was available to you for your next car, would you purchase without going to the dealership? So there's a gap between consumers' actual behavior and kind of what they say they want, and I would speculate there's really two reasons for that. One is there's a lot of dealerships that don't offer that opportunity to completely go through the entire purchase online. But there's also a segment of consumers that say, yeah, I want to buy it online. And then they get halfway through or 80% through the process and they go, hey, you know what? I do want to go in. I do want to drive that car. I do have some questions that maybe aren't answered yet. And I want to, go physically into the dealership. But the fact of the matter is consumer demands are changing. They're evolving. And I think as we've gone through this kind of crazy low inventory, obviously there's more customers that want to buy cars than there are cars on the ground in some cases, that we didn't necessarily have to always offer a lot of different options for consumers. Because if I've got the car, customer wants to buy the car, they're probably going to come in if that's the case. But in the future, that may not be the same. And now we're going to have to be a little bit more flexible with how we go through the process and how we allow consumers to transact at the dealership.
Yeah, I think that flexible is key. I think you're absolutely right, because they're going to want to do a little bit of both either way, maybe some online, but ultimately I think that human interaction is going to be key from an omni-channel standpoint. And I think that'll continue even as we get to the next slide in the F&I office. We recently did a survey with Automotive News with focus around virtual F&I. And with that digital human kind of customer journey, you'll kind of see 46% of the customers would enjoy a virtual kind of digital experience with their next purchase. Now, 40% of the customers, though, also stated that they want that option. And if a customer or a dealer didn't offer any kind of virtual or digital experience where they could do that, they wouldn't buy the vehicle there. And then, but there's also that human interaction where 44% of the customers, everything's shifting. They still want to be able to, if they're looking at F&I products, if they're financing and they're trying to secure their financing option, they still want to be able to talk to somebody at the dealership before they finalize that deal. So I think that journey from a digital standpoint, the human is key, but there's always going to be that human aspect of it that the customers are going to want to engage with.
Yeah, you make a great point, Mark. And we talk about online, in store, but the reality is, and the data all points to this, is that it has to be fluid, it has to be flexible, it has to be a hybrid approach. So how is it that dealers can respond to such a dynamic consumer base? Because they not only want the option to choose, they have the expectation that they will get to choose and really have control over the whole transaction. So how do dealers respond to that?
I think it comes back to just giving the customer options. There's a lot of digital retail tools that we'll get into that give the customer the ability to kind of engage in that process at their home, at their convenience, before they get into the store. I think it's just giving the customer options and understanding that is it positioned well on your websites and different things so the consumer can engage in that process and dealers can be prepared for it.
Yeah, I think, with everything we've seen going on in the marketplace, there's obviously some large disruptors in the marketplace that are selling cars 100% online. There are some OEMs that are getting into that game as well. So there's definitely a segment of consumers out there that say, hey, I'm willing to buy a car completely online. But what we're seeing most of the time is, hey, from consumers, I just want flexibility. I want to be able to do it differently. I don't want to have to go into the store to do 100% of the transaction. I want to be able to do part of it online, go into the store, and then finish online, or several different kind of paths to purchase. And it's just so important that there's flexibility. And I just want to hit on one thing that Mark just talked about, and that was 44% of consumers said they would not select financing options or purchase add-on products without first speaking to someone at the dealership. And I think if you're an F&I manager who's on this call right now, I see that and I smile a little bit. And I think, you know what? There's a large segment of consumers that need someone to explain, hey, here's what this product is, here's what it does, here's how it benefits you. Explain the different financing options. Transactions can get very complicated, and a lot of consumers still want that human involvement. But to that note, we've got to be flexible in how that involvement can occur. It doesn't have to be face-to-face. It can be virtual. It can be on the phone. It can be via chat through multiple different channels. But it's still a human interacting with a human to sell a car, to sell a product, to complete financing on the vehicle.
Yeah. And to create that consumer experience, you'll see the OEMs will continue to focus on that digital retail. They all have their different tools. They all want to be able to create a customer experience and really separate themselves from the other OEMs. So you'll see a lot of that in the space from SmartPath. Ford's got their option. Chevrolet, the GM's got the shop click and drive. So, the OEMs are continually going to try to create that customer experience or at least help partner dealers to give the customer the ability to kind of control that transaction.
Yeah, and Mark, when I look at this, and there's some logos that, there's some OEM programs that came out a few years ago that don't even exist anymore. And there's some new ones that have just come out, and there's some more that are going to be coming out pretty soon. But the consumer has spoken, and the consumer has clearly said, hey, I want flexibility. I want options. I want to be able to do things differently. And digital is clearly one of those solutions. It's not 100% kind of solution that's going to cure everything in the transaction. But the manufacturers continue to go down this path. They continue to make some really large investments in this space. And that's not going to stop. And it's definitely going to affect, how we all transact, how we all retail vehicles moving forward.
Yeah, it'd be great to get some insight from people on the call here. As we get into, you see digital retail, and what's your biggest challenge with your modern retail strategy?
Yep. So we've got a poll that just popped up again, and I do know that we have some folks at all different levels of the dealership and in different areas of the country, and just performing different roles and responsibilities. So I'd be eager to know what your feelings are and your individual perspectives on what those challenges might be for your own modern retail strategies. And again, that's in the bottom right corner. You can click on polls. That's where you'll find it, and you'll be able to, again, you can select multiple options or just one, whatever speaks to you. And I'll leave it open for just another moment for those results to keep coming in. Oh, here we go. We're getting some good action now. Some stuff's moving. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your feedback. It looks like the front runner, which I know you guys all have a lot of fun speaking to, is challenge being establishing and refining those processes, followed by training people and just getting the technology right. So interested to know what you all have to say about those challenges when it comes to modern retail. And thank you everybody for adding your feedback. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And not surprised, and that processes really come up. I think most of us, when we started in the business, learned this kind of very rigid process and to sell a car, and from a meet and greet to a needs analysis, to a walk around to a test drive, and all the things that go in to that. And one step had to happen before the other. And so now we go into this modern digital world where some of that doesn't even happen at the dealership, where a customer can do 60, 70, 80% of that before they walk through the door. And so I think sometimes we step back and go, okay, well, how does this work now? And I think sometimes we look at that old school linear process and we go, where can I put digital retail in here? And it doesn't work like that. Like, we have to step back and kind of really reinvent a whole new process and look at it differently, knowing that not every deal is going to start the same way. Not every customer is going to come in the same way. But it doesn't take away the importance of process. It doesn't mean we just kind of throw it all out the window and go, hey, we're just going to do everything kind of any kind of way, because process is more important than ever to make sure that we get as many transactions as we can and maximize every transaction. But when you think about that process, it's so important now to make sure that you've got the training for a new process in a modern world, and that you can hold people accountable to the process, to the training. Your process is also, it's got to be flexible now. It can't be rigid. It can't be exactly the same every time. It's got to be able to be something where a customer can move from one channel to another. They can start at the middle of what we think of as the traditional process, go back to the beginning, and then go to the end, or any kind of route that they want to go to get there. And it's really important that you're working with the right partners from a technology point of view and a process and training point of view that support your goals and to support that process. It's so important that everybody in your dealership, from the dealer to the managers, to the technology, to all your partners that you work with, are pointed in the same direction and really focused on the same goal. So what questions should you be asking yourself as we go through this evolution? The first one really hits on what we just talked about, and that is, do I have enough in-house resources to accomplish my goals? We talked earlier, when we talk about inventory coming back, we talk about consumers continuing to slowly evolve and change. And we said what got us here is not going to get us to the next level. And so I think it's a good time right now, when things are going pretty well, to step back and go, do I have the right resources in place? That's people, that's technology, that's processes, to accomplish my goals, not only today, but in the future.
And I think another question, Jonathan, is are my F&I options well represented in the digital space? Do you have the ability where a consumer can go in and research, do some of their research around F&I products, what products are being offered, different financing options? So from a website standpoint, do you have that positioned in there so a consumer can do all the research? Then once again, back to that 44% number, they're going to want to have some kind of human interaction to answer some questions. But as long as you're positioned well in the digital space, I think it gives you that connection with the consumer.
Yeah, so when we think about F&I in a modern world, and we talked about customers starting earlier in the process, customers wanting to go through the process in different ways, whether it be in-store and remote, it's important that those F&I options may have to start earlier. And the other thing, to go into the next question, is, do I have processes in place to support customers in-store and remote? And am I in a place where the customer can say, hey, I want to take delivery and I want to do it at home, and I get just as excited about that deal as I get as a customer sitting in my showroom. And I've got the right process in place to go, hey, no problem, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. You want to take delivery at home? Here's what the process looks like. You want to do it in the store? Here's what the process looks like. It's completely up to you. But for that to work, you've got to have the right process, and you've got to be prepared and equipped to maximize performance on the front end, on the back end, on F&I products, on financing, regardless of where that customer is.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that, training and processes, and am I working with the right provider that will support my needs in the future? Back to that poll question, there was 3 things. It was process, training, and technology, right? Do you have a partner that can position to help you refine your processes, if it's F&I or sales process? Do you have the right provider that, from a digital standpoint, that can help support that need? And as well as training, do you have a right provider that can put them all together and be a strong partner from a training standpoint? Because they're not independent, right? You can have the best technology out there, but if you don't have a strong process that goes with it, it doesn't work as well. You can have the best process out there, but if you don't have training that's consistent to reinforce that, it just doesn't stay consistent. So I think really identifying that right provider that can really put all 3 of those together for you and really position yourself to ensure in the future that you're well positioned.
Yeah, I think these are all critical questions that anyone needs to be asking to ensure that they're prepared for success now and in the future. And I know that we're going to speak to this in this last slide and really come full circle on some of those stats that we were sharing earlier on. And if you can just kind of give us an overview on how we're aligning these trends with performance goals and with what dealers should be looking for the future.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, as you think about those questions that we just went over, we wanted to close with this graph, because when I look at this graph, I get really excited, but it's also a little scary, to be honest with you, to look at this. And I see kind of what happened with profitability per deal as that kind of inventory line went down. We know that inventory line's going to come up. We know consumers are going to continue to evolve, and there's going to be more options for them in the future, many more than there are today. And so as that inventory comes back, how do we make sure that we're prepared to be flexible and to serve those customers in a way that we're providing a great experience, but that we're also maintaining these levels of performance in the future? And I think there's never been a better time to take a step back and make some tough decisions. Do some really deep evaluation on your store, on your processes, on your people, on your technology, while things are good. And to evaluate, hey, how can I continue this level of performance, or how can I get to the next level as inventory gets back and as consumers continue to evolve?
Yeah, I think that's important. It goes back to inventory is going to come back. If it's not in 2022, it's 2023 and beyond. So staying focused on maintaining that performance is going to be key. John, I think you talked about it. I mean, now's not a better time to look at your process and making sure they're defined and kind of positioned, as well as training that kind of bolts onto that. I think right now, so when inventory does come back, that'll give you an upward mobility to kind of maintain that performance and not really to slide back. Because that's going to be the challenge that a lot of dealers are going to be kind of challenged with. I think it's important that processes and training is going to come back to that.
Yeah. So just to recap, I know we've shared a lot of insights today. I'm sure it sparked a ton of curiosity, a lot of interest, a lot of questions on how we can differentiate ourselves in a changing market and really execute on the processes that are going to lead us to success. So if you'd like to have some more conversations with our team, I'm going to just drop in a quick button here that'll pop up on your screen. I encourage you, click the button, get in touch with us. It'll take you right to our website. You'll see an orange button. Go ahead and tap that and just tell us a little bit more about you and some of the challenges and opportunities you see in F&I, and we'd be happy to reach out, continue the conversation. This has been a really exciting and engaging conversation that we've had so far today. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from all of you, and looking forward to seeing how we can partner together and help you now and into the future. And with that, I want to give everybody a few minutes back in their day. So thank you so much for your time and your participation. It's been really exciting to have you all here for our latest office hours, and we will see you back here really soon. Have a great day, everyone. And thank you, Jonathan and Mark, for all your time.